There is a number buried in Florida's insurance system that almost nobody outside Tallahassee says out loud: $15 billion. That is about the money set aside by the state-backed insurance company now standing behind a huge share of Florida homes. If one bad hurricane season blows past it, state law lets officials send the rest of the bill back to nearly everyone: on car insurance, on boat insurance, even on renter's insurance. People who do not own a home at all. What nobody tells you is why that backup had to be there, and the answer is water. The numbers behind that backup are hard to look at. Between 2014 and 2024, the number of active home insurance policies sold by private companies in Florida fell from 3.2 million to about 710,000. Since 2017, 11 insurance companies that covered Florida homes went under and stopped paying claims. More than 30 companies have pulled back coverage in some way in just the last 3 years. The average homeowner here now pays close to $5,800 a year, more than double the national average and the highest in the country. And about 1 in 5 Florida homeowners has simply stopped buying coverage at all. For 3 years, the story everyone told was that Florida had a lawsuit problem. Too many claims, too many lawyers, too much fraud. Fix the lawsuits, the thinking went, and the market heals. In early 2026, officials stood up and said it worked. The market was saved. But the thing that actually empties a Florida home of everything inside it was never a lawsuit. It was water. And the water is still rising. Sanibel Island, September 2022. For decades, this barrier island on Florida's Gulf Coast was the easiest money in the insurance business. About 5,000 people live there. Year after year, they wrote their checks for home and flood coverage and almost never filed a claim. Insurance companies took in more than $10 in payments for every single dollar they paid back out. It was a near-perfect business. Then, on Wednesday, September 28, 2022, a Category 4 hurricane named Ian came in off the Gulf with 150-mile-per-hour winds and pushed a wall of seawater up to 12 feet high straight across the island. The only bridge on and off Sanibel broke apart. Homes that had stood for half a century came off their foundations. Ian did not stay on the island. It dropped up to 15 inches of rain on parts of southwest Florida, and for the hardest-hit areas, that much rain was a 1-in-1,000-year event. At least 114 people in Florida did not survive it. When the totals came in, Ian had caused around $60 billion in insured losses and close to $100 billion in total damage, making it the most expensive disaster on Earth that year. Now pull back from that one island and look at the shape of the whole state. Florida is a long, low, flat finger of land, with the longest coastline of any state in the lower 48, around 1,350 miles of it, and most of its 23 million people live within a short drive of the sea. On average, the land sits only about 100 feet above the sea, and huge stretches of the coast sit just a few feet above the tide. There is almost nowhere in Florida that water cannot reach. That shape of the land is the whole problem. It is what made an island like Sanibel such easy money for so long. And it is what makes the bill so huge when the easy years finally end. On the coast, in places like Miami-Dade and Palm Beach, a single year of home coverage can run past $7,000. Inland, it is a small part of that. The closer you live to the water, the more the water costs you. That was the storm the public watched on the news. In the months that followed, Floridians filed close to 458,000 hurricane claims, and the fight over who would pay them was just beginning. Behind the scenes, something quieter was breaking. Here is the part almost everyone missed at the time. Florida, for years, made up only about 9% of all the home insurance claims filed in the whole United States. But it made up more than 70% of the country's home insurance lawsuits. 9% of the claims. 70% of the lawsuits. Some of those suits were real homeowners fighting for storm money they were owed. Many were not. Florida ran a system where lawyers could collect their fees straight from the insurance companies, and where a homeowner could sign the rights to their claim over to a contractor, who could then sue in the homeowner's name. Roofers knocked on doors after every storm offering free checks. The lawsuits stacked up. The money drained out of the insurance companies. So the companies did the math and left. 5 Florida home insurance companies collapsed in 2022 alone. United Property and Casualty went under in 2023. The ones that stayed stopped selling new policies, dropped tens of thousands of the ones they had, and asked for the biggest rate hikes the law would let them. Florida's drop rate, the share of homeowners told at renewal time that their coverage was ending, climbed 280% between 2018 and 2023, the steepest rise in the country. And every homeowner those companies dropped had to land somewhere. They landed on Citizens. Citizens Property Insurance Corporation was set up by Florida's lawmakers in 2002 to be the insurer of last resort, the place you go only when no private company will take you. It was meant to stay small. By October of 2023, it had grown to 1.42 million policies and become the single largest home insurer in the whole state. The backup had quietly become the main floor. Now, zoom out, because to see why that is dangerous, you have to understand how insurance is supposed to work. And it is simpler than people think. Everyone in a neighborhood pays into one bucket. When a single house catches fire, the money to rebuild it comes out of the bucket. The system holds as long as trouble comes one house at a time, because the rest of the street keeps paying in while one family takes out. A hurricane breaks that. A hurricane does not burn one house on the street. It takes the whole street, and the next county, all in one afternoon. Everyone reaches into the bucket at the same moment, and the bucket was never built for a day like that. That is why insurance companies buy their own insurance, called reinsurance, and why the cost of that reinsurance, after a storm like Ian, runs straight through to the price every homeowner pays. And reinsurance is only half of the squeeze. The cost to actually rebuild a Florida house went up at the same time, with building prices rising nearly 55% between 2020 and 2022, far faster than normal inflation. A house that costs more to rebuild costs more to insure. Stack the rising rebuild cost on top of the rising reinsurance cost, and the total payments collected across the state grew to around $23 billion, up almost 40% in just a few years. Now here is the part that should make every Floridian sit up, even the ones who rent. When Citizens runs out of money to pay its claims, it does not simply go broke the way a normal company would. State law hands it a tool no private insurer has. It can charge what is called an assessment, an extra fee first on its own customers, and then, if the losses are large enough, on nearly everyone in the state who holds a property or casualty policy. Your car insurance, your boat, your renter's policy. Even if you have never owned a home in your life, you can be billed to help cover the damage to someone else's. That is the $15 billion backup from the opening. It is not a savings account sitting safely in a vault. It is a promise that if the water ever gets big enough, the bill goes to everyone. The people running Citizens understand exactly how heavy that promise is, and they have spent 2 years trying to shrink it. Tim Serio, president and chief executive of Citizens Property Insurance Corporation, has said on the record that as Citizens shrinks, so does the risk of assessments on Floridians who are not its customers, and that this should be welcome news to all. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. We cover the water systems and the money built on top of them every week, with the full picture you need to actually follow what is going on. Step back from Florida for a moment, because the shrinking of Citizens is real, and on paper, it looks like a full comeback. The new laws passed in 2022 and 2023 did what they were built to do. They ended the one-way lawyer fees. They banned signing claims over to contractors. And the lawsuits fell off a cliff. Fewer than 9% of claims went to court in 2024. By early 2026, the whole picture had turned around. Citizens had dropped below 1 million policies at the end of 2024 for the first time in years, then kept falling all through 2025. 17 new insurance companies had come into the Florida market. Citizens, which peaked at 1.42 million policies in October of 2023, had fallen to about 336,000 by March of 2026, a 76% drop and the lowest level in its history. For the first time since 2015, Citizens asked the state to cut its rates instead of raise them, and the cut was approved, an average drop of close to 9% for its homeowners. Just 4 years earlier, in 2022, the same company had pointed to a rate increase of more than 91%. Tim Serio told the Citizens Board of Governors that the Florida home insurance market was, in his words, again healthy and vibrant. On the lawsuits, he is right. The same new law that drove the lawyers away is the same new law now pulling insurance companies back. But look closely at what that law fixed and at what it never touched. It fixed the courtroom. It did nothing about the Gulf, because this was never only about lawyers. Underneath the legal fight, a second number was always running, and it has nothing to do with lawyers. Here is the fact that sits at the center of this whole story, and almost no homeowner fully gets it until the water is already in the living room. A normal Florida home insurance policy does not cover flood. It never has. Not storm surge, not rising water, not rain pooling across your floor. Citizens does not cover it either. If a hurricane pushes the Gulf through your front door, the home policy you have paid $5,000 a year for pays nothing for that water. To be covered, you need a separate flood policy, almost always through the federal government's National Flood Insurance Program. And most homeowners do not have one. When Ian hit, only about 30% of people in the 9 hardest-hit counties carried federal flood insurance. That left about 1.3 million people facing the most damaging part of the storm with no coverage for it at all. After Ian, Florida homeowners were left holding somewhere between $10 and $17 billion in flood damage that no insurance policy would pay, about $500 to $800 for every person in the state. Even the people who thought they were covered ran into the same wall. In the fall of 2024, Helene and Milton hit the state within weeks of each other, the first real test of the rebuilt market. Across that season, with Debbie earlier in the year, citizens turned down about 13% of all the claims filed against it, and some of those were turned down for a single reason. They were claims for flood, and flood was never in the policy. This is the number that does not get better no matter how many lawsuits vanish. Florida's flood risk is not holding steady, it is climbing. One recent study put hard numbers on the squeeze. Deep Sky Research, in a 2025 report titled Uninsurable, found that the new home policies sold every 3 months in Florida had collapsed by 77%, falling from about 164,000 to roughly 37,000, even as the average premium climbed 22% after inflation to around $3,454. The same report counted a 300% rise in how often extreme hurricanes hit over the past 40 years, and named that, not the courtroom, as the real engine behind the collapse. The First Street Foundation, which works out flood risk down to each single property, counts more than 3 million Florida properties facing some level of flood risk over the next 30 years, with more than 300,000 of them already in the highest group, almost certain to flood. And Florida is only the leading edge. The same group counts more than 24 million properties across the country at risk of serious flooding over that window, far more than the federal maps let on. The federal flood maps that decide who is even required to buy coverage are, in many places, decades out of date, and they do not count the heavy rain that now does much of the damage. Many of the homes that take on water in Florida were never marked as high risk at all, and the program everyone falls back on for that water, the National Flood Insurance Program, is more than $20 billion in debt to the United States Treasury. Florida leans on it harder than any other state, with about 1.7 million flood policies covering $440 billion in property. In 2021, it rolled out a new way of setting prices, called Risk Rating 2.0, built to push every policy toward the true cost of its risk, with bills allowed to climb as much as 18% a year until they get there. Which means the one kind of coverage that actually pays for Florida's water is getting more expensive every year, right alongside the home coverage that does not pay for it at all. The state has noticed the gap. Starting in January of 2026, citizens began requiring flood coverage on its more expensive homes, and by January of 2027, it will require it on all of them. That is an honest fix. It is also the state admitting, right there in the rules, that the home policy was never going to stop the water on its own. And for most homeowners, walking away from the bill is not even a choice. Anyone with a mortgage is required by the lender to carry coverage. And if the policy ends, the bank buys one for them. A policy the bank forces on them that often costs 2 or 3 times the normal rate. The only people who can legally go without are the ones who own their homes outright, which is part of why so many of the uninsured are retirees on fixed incomes, the people with the least room to take a hit. So follow the water out from a single flooded house and watch what it touches. First, the homeowner. They paid their premium, the storm came, and the part that ruined the house, the water, was the part nobody covered. They rebuild on their own savings or they walk away from the land. Second, the neighborhood. Along Florida's southwest coast, real estate agents are now warning of a wave of foreclosures, not from lost jobs, but from insurance. People who set themselves up to retire in a paid-off home cannot carry the premiums and the flood bills on a fixed income, and they lose the house anyway. Jessica Gatewood, a real estate agent in Fort Myers, has watched it happen up close. People who thought they had built a retirement they could afford are finding they no longer can, and as she told a reporter, it boils down to insurance costs. Third, the housing market. A home you cannot insure cheaply is a home that is hard to sell. Buyers cannot close because a mortgage requires coverage. Whole stretches of coastline become tough to sell at any price. Fourth, the rest of the state. When Citizens takes on all of that risk and a large enough storm blows past the money it has set aside, the assessment rule turns one area's loss into a statewide bill, charged to drivers, renters, and boat owners who never lived anywhere near the coast. Fifth, the country. National banks hold hundreds of billions of dollars in Florida mortgages. If home values crack because the houses beneath them can no longer be insured, that strain does not stay inside Florida. It travels up into the money system the way a crack in a foundation travels up into the walls. A house that cannot be insured is a house a bank is nervous to lend against, and a mortgage that looks shakier than it did a year before. Spread that across an entire coastline and it stops being a story about insurance. It becomes a story about what the home is worth at all. That is why this has reached Washington. A United States Senate committee has already started looking into Citizens, its risk from rising water, and the question of whether a bad enough season could force the state to ask the federal government for a bailout. Dave Jones, who served as the Insurance Commissioner of California from 2011 to 2018 and now runs the Climate Risk Initiative at the University of California, Berkeley, has put it about as plainly as anyone in his job ever has. He has said the insurance crisis in the United States is the canary in the coal mine, and that the canary is dead. He has warned that the country is marching toward an uninsurable future. Max Dugan-Knight, a climate data scientist at Deep Sky Research, put it the other way around. The insurance crisis in Florida, he said, is the financial system's early warning of climate catastrophe. Insurance is the first place the cost of rising water shows up, because putting a price on exactly that risk is the whole business. It is only fair to say that not everyone agrees the cause is mostly the climate. Mark Friedlander of the Insurance Information Institute has argued that Florida's collapse was driven first by lawsuits and fraud, not by storms, and that the comeback proves the new laws, not the weather, were the real problem. The data gives him a strong case on the lawsuits. The lawsuits were out of control, and ending them clearly pulled insurance companies back into the state. But there is a difference between why the market broke and why it stays shaky. The lawsuits explain why the companies left when they did. The water explains why no law can ever fully fix it. You can pass a law to wipe out a lawyer's fee. You cannot pass a law to wipe out the Gulf of Mexico. And Florida has stood in almost exactly this spot before, in a way almost everyone has forgotten. In August of 1992, Hurricane Andrew flattened a huge stretch of South Florida and bankrupted at least 16 insurance companies in a single blow. The state's answer then looks almost the same as its answer now. It built a public backup, leaned on it, and told everyone the market had been steadied. The line of state-built safety nets that led to Citizens runs straight back to that storm. 30 years later, the same pattern is running again. A storm breaks the market, the state builds a backup, the backup grows, officials say the system is fixed, and the water keeps rising underneath all of it. So the questions stack up over the whole state tonight. If the market is healthy again, why does the one danger that actually destroys Florida homes still sit outside almost every policy? What happens to that $15 billion backup the first year a big hurricane lands on a coast, more crowded and more expensive than it has ever been? How do you sell a comeback built on laws that fixed the courtroom and left the shoreline exactly where it was? And how long can a flood program, already $20 billion in debt, keep being the answer to a problem that grows every year? Nobody in Tallahassee has an answer to those yet. For now, the rate cuts are real, the new insurance companies are real, and on paper, Florida looks saved. The lawsuits are gone, the premiums are easing, the victory lap is underway. And somewhere in the Florida laws, that one line still sits exactly where it has always sat. The rule that says if the water ever gets big enough, the bill goes to everyone. It has not been pulled at full force yet. It is just waiting. Out on the coast, the tide comes in against the seawalls a little higher than it used to, every year. quiet and patient and completely uninsured. The new laws fixed the lawsuits. The water never read them.